Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Representation Cinema. We talk about the representation of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color in movies. This podcast is hosted by Our Voices Project. Our goal is to dismantle destructive stereotypes of minority groups perpetuated in the media by producing films centered on the multifaceted experiences of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people by providing educational resources across marginalized groups brought on by the stories we share. Our Voices Project is also a committed community partner, providing opportunities to affirm racial and cultural identities, empowering students as agents of social change, and contributing to an individual's learning through cultivation of critical thinking. I'm Deborah Alvarez, the cinematographer and editor for Our Voices Project, and joining me with us, we have Annalisa Rogers.
Again, I'm Annalisa Rogers. I am a community advocate in every respect of the word. And tonight we have with us Taurus, and we also have Ricardo. Mr. Ricardo Millhouse is a PhD, is a postdoctoral fellow in the Frederick Douglass Institute at the University of Rochester. Ricardo's research interests rest at the intersection of race, place, and sensation. Ricardo theorizes about Black queer placemaking, design justice, and public culture. Currently, Ricardo teaches a course titled Black Sex and Sexuality at the University of Rochester. He has published in the journals of LGBTQ Studies, University of California, Los Angeles, and he also does social theory through University of Kentucky. And also with us, we have Mr. Taurus Savant. Taurus, I hope I said your last name correctly.
You did. Happy to hear
it. He comes to us by way of New York City. Taurus Savant is a queer Black artist, musician, published author, and community advocate living in Rochester that thrives on freedom of expression and strives to be his best self through gaining knowledge and adventures through life. So I hope you join me in welcoming both of our guests today. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the film Moonlight, and it's a very good movie. Moonlight is a drama that was released back in 2016 and starred Trevante Rhodes, Mahershala Ali, Ashton Sanders, and Naomi Harris. The story follows Chiron and looks at 3 defining chapters in his life as a young Black man growing up in Miami. His journey to manhood is guided by the kindness and support and love of the community that helps raise him. The film is directed by Barry Jenkins and received the Academy Award for Best Picture in 2017. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, and you're thinking about watching it, you can watch it on Showtime now and then come back to listen and or watch our podcast. From here on out, we'll be discussing the film in depth, so spoilers are ahead. So just note you have been warned. So getting to the movie, I think I wanted to start just by asking our panelists, what was your key takeaway from this film? What stood out the most to you? And I think I'll direct this question to Taurus first.
Well, what stood out for the film for me is kind of watching certain types of parallels between Chiron's life as a child and experiences that I had as a child and stories that I've heard from other queer Black youth, and how the society, environment, and people and peers around them seem to inquire and discover and know more about the concept of somebody's sexuality more before the individual does. So he's being called gay and all sorts of other types of slurs and being made fun of because of his mannerisms or whatnot, and he doesn't even understand it himself because he hasn't really come to that realization yet. And everybody kind of wants him to be a certain way, and they have their own perspective of who he is when he doesn't even know who he is yet. So that's how I identified with it, especially.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I think, when we are young, we're in the process of developing who we are, and it's interesting how when people come at you and it's like, well, you're this and you're that, how much those influences could also either encourage or distract you from becoming the true authentic self that you can actually be. So that's a really excellent point. What did you think, Ricardo?
I agree with Taurus. So, you know, when I first saw this film, I saw this film in Syracuse, New York, and at the time, and I literally cried because, like, throughout the whole film, but I literally cried because I saw myself in Chiron. Like, for example, when at the beginning of the film, when he's, on I guess a football field or field playing, kick the ball or something like that. The kids were calling him soft, right? And Kevin was asking him, why you're not soft, right? Like, you need to prove that you're not soft. You need to prove that. And so for me, that was a situation that I was like, oh, wait, I had that same experience growing up in elementary school too, because a lot of the boys that I grew up with were like athletic, they were popular, like I was quiet, I had certain mannerisms that didn't match their mannerisms. Like, I probably had, a higher pitched voice at that time than other boys that I was growing up with. And so growing up in Mobile, Alabama, there was really not a place for me to kind of understand what my sexuality or even my identity, my gender identity was at that time, because I had to kind of cloak myself in these sports that I didn't necessarily want to play, like football or like basketball. Actually, I enjoyed basketball, but it wasn't necessarily nothing I wanted to do. It was more so I was doing it to mask myself and to not let them catch on to me, I guess, showing that I was a little bit different. Like, I was doing whatever the other boys were doing, so I wouldn't get teased and made fun of as frequently as I did. And so from that point, like from the outset, the film kind of, spoke to me and was like, oh wait, this is a time when this film is like representing Black boys on screen in an important way, where other Black boys and even men to this day can see themselves in Chiron's story. So that's what I took away.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I think when I saw that part of it, I have brothers, they're straight males, but one thing that I do note is that there can be this toxicity to masculinity, and there's this push for you to be hard and to be strong and to be tough, and it's like, where does that begin and end in terms of who you become? Could either of you guys speak to what your thoughts were about that demonstration of toxic masculinity in the movie?
Well, excuse me. What it speaks to me, it says that despite even what your perceived sexuality would be, there's still a certain specific way that a Black man is supposed to act. So like even as it was regarded when they were calling him gay, and that they seemed almost to not really put too much emphasis on him being gay or possible or perceived to be gay, and more so on, you have to be tough. You have to, like, the majority of it was being asked, oh, you're not soft, or you just prove that you're not soft, fight back. That kind of attitude, because it's not necessarily so much about what it is you're doing. It's more so about the perception that you're putting off. So if you display these traits of, being kind of tough, rough and tumble, and somebody who plays sports, or somebody who, gets all the girls, or even, somebody who has all the things that they think a man should have and what they perceive it. I mean, at the end of it, to me, none of it really matters, because it's up to really kind of ourselves to just define what we think manhood is or isn't, or if manhood is even a concept to keep. But what I can say is that it does help shape, because I think that kind of concept of toxic masculinity, when you instill that in a child, when they don't know really any which way about what a a man is supposed to be, or a boy, or even a girl. They just know what kids are supposed to be, so they become influenced by that. And that's why you see that as Chiron gets older, he becomes more tough, more rugged, more hard. And it leaves you to wonder what kind of man he would have grown up to be had he not been pushed so much and traumatized and oppressed, and if he had instead been given the love and nurture and interest and admiration that he deserved as a child. So I guess we'll never know, but that
Absolutely.
could be the case with any and every child that you see around this earth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
After you.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to just also say that this concept of toxic masculinity, it does more. I mean, masculinity, like gender performance itself, is something that is, I think, a thing that carries on throughout the film. However, it's interesting to me to see how Chiron and the other young Black men were socialized, right, in Liberty City, because we see, I'm skipping ahead here, but we see how Terrell in class, right, in high school, is like always making fun of Chiron, bumping Chiron when he's leaving the school, right? And so one of the examples that really showed like how traumatic toxic masculinity is, not even to people on the receiving end of it, right, but also the people who are acting out toxic masculinity, because we see Kevin and Chiron having this intimate moment on the beach, right? And then the next day or the same week, we see Kevin beat up Chiron because Terrell is trying to play puppeteer and force Kevin to hit Chiron, right? And we see how there were not necessarily a lot of resources around in the school at the time to kind of forbid Terrell from coming around Chiron anymore, right? Instead, we see Terrell in class with Chiron, allowing him the opportunity to hit him with the desk, right? And then we see him getting pulled out to in the police car in handcuffs. And so the point I'm trying to make is, not only does toxic masculinity operate at the individual level, but also too, like school-wide. In this school, we see how Chiron was affected by it, Terrell was affected by it, Kevin is affected by it, and all the people bystanding is affected by it, right? And so that's the point that I thought about concerning toxic masculinity, is that it doesn't only affect the person on the receiving end, but also the person acting out this toxic masculinity and carrying it out and reproducing these behaviors that are, harmful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And, kind of going back to Taurus's point about perception, and where Chiron went to in terms of, what he did it for a profession, and it's like, when you really look at the perception, it's like, did he do it because he thought that this is what men were supposed to do? And, we'll talk a little bit about the father figure he had in Juan, but, did he identify with Juan because he thought that that was more masculine, or that's what the world expected him to become? So it's kind of interesting, the choice that and the path that he chose to take. Was it more than just because of him beating up Terrell? What led to that point? But also too, I feel like the whole emotion and feeling stuff, it seems like, because of what we expect males to be, he had to basically subjugate his own feelings about everything. And it seems like he just became numb. And we talk about further along the movie, he says, well, I've never really been with anyone except you. And why? Was that because he was afraid of his feelings, afraid of feeling what he might feel? Any of the emotions associated with being a gay Black male. So it's just been interesting. But also, I wanted to ask about Terrell. I kind of wondered if one of the reasons why Terrell was such a big bully because he was struggling with his own sense of identity. As a female, and again, this could be completely different than what Mel's experienced, but when I was growing up, one of the things that I did become was a bully. And one of the reasons why is because I struggled with my own sexuality. And, I had people, talking about me, picking on me, making fun of me until I got to a breaking point where I started beating other people up. But it was because I couldn't handle who the person I was becoming and not having the necessary supports to kind of encourage me in a very appropriate way to be the person that I wanted to be or to be the authentic person. So I kind of identified with Terrell a little bit, I'm ashamed to say, but I kind of understood if that's what was happening with him, why he was kind of doing some of the things he was doing. Again, not to justify, but when you're young, it's really hard to come to an understanding of who you're supposed to be when you've got people saying that this is wrong, but and you don't have the appropriate support. So that was kind of my thought about Terrell. So what about the bullying in the school system? Anybody had any particular thoughts about more of that, how that impacts sexuality or just bullying in general?
Well, the first thing that I thought of as you were saying that is the fact that in my school tenure, I've known plenty of Terrells, plenty. I won't go so far as to make the assumption that he might be hiding behind, a budding sexuality. Sometimes people are a-holes because people are just a-holes, and that's also just kind of learned behavior because that's what makes you look cool. He had to have picked that kind of behavior up from somewhere, but that's also not to say that some of those cases don't happen to be the case, because I know a couple who have been like that as well. But I think in Terrell's case, I don't know if it was a sexuality
thing. He was just a jerk.
He was a jerk who was conditioned to be that way through all the learned behaviors he learned growing up, and now that's how he treats other people. And he has an opportunity to maybe influence different kinds of behavior, but it worked on Kevin, and it made him be essentially a bully in the same right. So it kind of like just pushed it along. But what I will also say, I guess from my own experience and people who try to do that, is that they hate what they can't understand. They don't understand it. They don't get it. Sometimes they wish that they could be that in a way that, people have authentic methods of expression, and some people find themselves early, whether that's queerness or any other type of otherness that's not the norm. And so when you are grown up and you have such a way where you weren't allowed to really express any other kinds of interests, and you only could just be this one kind of person because you have expectations put on you, you kind of take your frustration out on people who are other, because you don't take the time to understand. And I'm sure if he ever really kind of sat down and just had a conversation with Chiron, maybe there would have been some sort of understanding, or maybe even a friendship. But because he never even bothered to give it a chance, we saw what we saw.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to that whole thing about, the perception piece you brought up earlier. It's just, perception and assumption, shouldn't assume either, but, what would have happened? What would have changed the course of their relationship if he just had that conversation about anything, really? But yeah, excellent point. Ricardo, do you have an opinion or thought about that piece?
I do. So coming back to the socialization piece, similar to Taurus, I also know several Terrells, and I remember distinctly in high school. In high school we had to dress out for PE and stuff. So I hated that. I hated that because that was a time when everyone needs to show their muscles and like show their six pack and like get all your business, who you're dating and X, Y, and Z. And so because I was always the last one to dress out, like I'll say Terrell stay behind, and he would like bump me to like show my muscle. He's like, oh, you know, I'm more masculine than you. He'll make his chest poke out, and it was just like, you know, a competition, it seemed, in the locker room, right? And so in retro, at the time, I was, you know, of course it was a form of bullying, but in retrospect, I'm always thinking, what if there could be some type of space that allows young Black boys, or even young people in general, to have these conversations with each other, right? To your point, Annalisa. Like, because I'm wondering if Terrell had sat down with Chiron, right? You know, mediated by the principal or a school counselor, someone, a therapist at best. You know, what could have gone differently, right? Because we see how quickly Chiron was escorted out in handcuffs, and there could have been so many other steps before that happened, right? Like mediation, you know, recommended counseling, or therapy of some sort. Anything outside of taking this young man to jail, right? And then like reintroducing these two young men in the same space, right? That doesn't necessarily seem like the right choice to make. But again, on screen, these are actual, you know, experiences that people have. And so again, I'm going to come back to the socialization. Why is it that toxic masculinity can be reproduced in these same spaces without any interventions into why it is that we have to socialize young men, young Black men, to act a certain way, and then to take certain things and then end up in the back of a police car? There seems to me that there could be, you know, in terms of this bullying in the schools, right, there could be some type of space where folks can have these one-on-one conversations. I don't know what that looks like in practice, but you know, it just seems to me that that will be at least a step to try.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, there's two things that kind of come to mind when we were talking about Chiron and him going to jail for, you know, hitting Terrell with that chair. Childhood trauma, both on Chiron's part, even on Kevin's part, and possibly even on Terrell's point, and the whole social norms. You know, the social norms that says, okay, you're naturally violent because you're a Black male, so therefore we're not even going to give you a chance, and we're just going to arrest you because you attacked this kid, you assaulted him, and we're just going to put you in jail. You know, and where were the adults? You know, I have that question, is where were the adults to actually kind of, you know, intercede on both of these children's behalf? I know that, you know, with Chiron, his mother wasn't the greatest person to have as a support because she was an addict. But even the principal, where were some of those leaderships to kind of help mitigate some of these circumstances that landed Chiron in that whole prison, the school to prison pipeline? What are you guys' thoughts on that? Did that strike you as well?
I would say it struck me only because I would say the adults weren't present because they didn't care, they didn't have the range, or they were too afraid to get involved. When I was growing up in school, like we did have like a school advisor, but nobody who I could talk to as far as like sexuality is concerned. I only had my friends and internet friends to really come to terms with that. So I had nobody to really kind of go, okay, is this really wrong? Are these people justified in treating me and others the way that they treat each other? Or is this some sort of learned behavior? If anything, the only thing I ever got was affirmation that said, it's not you, it's them, you know, they're bad, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, that can be the case, but where is the fostering of understanding? That's the part I always hope for, instead of me essentially kind of having to fend for myself or even be singled out even more because I was getting certain types of special treatment, where I got to leave the classroom and I got to go sit in the office, or I got to, you know, be further away from the other kids, or got to do other kinds of things, mostly because they wanted me, you know, in a way safe from harm, but didn't necessarily know how to really step in and mitigate that with between myself and the other students or anybody else who had any sort of kind of conflict. And because thankfully, I didn't go to jail, but there was a situation where there was a boy who wouldn't leave me alone, and so I threatened to bust him upside the head with a lock. And I came into school the next day fully prepared to do it, but somebody told, and I got in trouble. And they brought him in, and all of a sudden the boy's acting scared. He's like, "Oh, I didn't know it was that serious. I didn't." And it's like when you have somebody who's antagonizing you day in and day out, you eventually get to a point where it's like, no, this is about enough. And I hate to run into that. I won't even call it a stereotype. I just think that anybody, regardless of who you are, after being pushed for so much, you're gonna react. And that, in my opinion, because even though I tried words and tried speaking to adults and that didn't work, I felt like hitting him upside the head was going to be the only solution that was going to make it stop. We didn't get to that point, but that's where it was for me anyways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was also wondering where the adults were. I mean, they were present, but not present. Like, the only option that the principal gave was to press charges, right? And like that within itself only further pushes Terrell down into that prison, right? Down that pipeline. And so again, like I just truly believe that, there are other avenues and capacity, other avenues that, these resources, these school resource officers, principals, whatever have you, the leadership can use, to intervene. And so that moment was so, I think, important because it just busts open the lack of resources within schools, not necessarily in Miami, right? It's like nationwide, right? So like, and when I say other resources, what I mean is like, there are different schools doing now peace circles. Like I learned, like a lot of students in Chicago are taking up peace circles, like basically conflict resolution. Like instead of like sending them to, juvenile detention centers or like or even suspension, they send them to like an office where they can actually talk out their differences and reach a resolution with a certified peacemaker facilitator. So I'm not trying to say that will work in every single school, but there should be some other steps between sending a student to be picked up by a police officer, right? Because that within itself is traumatic for a young person. Because it just seems to me that that should not even be on the table, because you're re-traumatizing students who are traumatized. When they come to school, you're re-traumatizing them. So why not have certain avenues for different folks? Like we talk about inclusion, right? Why is it that we're lacking in the fact that we don't have, a diverse range, to use your word, Taurus, a range of resources and tools and people that will accommodate these students who come to school every day with different traumas. So that was really, that really like made me focus in on that. Like, oh, so the only option is to call 911 and haul Chiron off in the back of the police car. So he's now being re-traumatized. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you think about that in terms of the childhood trauma, and again, reinforcing, what he's becoming, it was kind of like a real reinforcement, and again, not having the support that he needed to really become who he could have become. It feels like there is missed opportunity on so many different levels, not on the educators, on the parents. So let's talk about the parents actually a little bit, because I wanted to kind of talk about Teresa and drawing a blank at Chiron's mom's name. What did you think about their influences on Chiron and his development and in this movie?
Well, I think her name was Paula, Chiron's mother. So, we see her struggle with her addiction. And we see how Chiron had to grow up like quickly, right, to take care of not only himself but his mother. We see on different instances where, you know, Paula is like laying on the couch and, you know, without a blanket, and Chiron like lays the blanket over her, like being the mother, being a parent to, you know, his mom, right? And so that is another type of I'm still thinking about like his school trauma, but now he's at home dealing with that trauma, right? Of seeing your mother, you know, go through this addiction, and you don't necessarily have a childhood, right? Because you're always in work mode. You have to care for yourself and make sure you don't get hurt at school, and then make your way home and make sure your mom doesn't get hurt in the streets, right? And so for me, you know, that their relationship, Chiron and Paula's relationship, it was more so Chiron, you know, picking up like all the pieces once he made it home. He had to base, you know, prepare food, you know, run his bath water, and, you know, he would heat the water on the stove literally, and like take it to the bathtub so you can have hot water to like take the bath in, right? And so their relationship, I think, was, you know, Chiron is the parent in that.
Right. Yeah.
I agree. I feel like as I watched it, I feel like if there was any fleeting moment of joy or happiness, it was so fleeting that we didn't see it, because the only moments of some semblance of joy that Chiron was getting was when he was playing, you know, kick the ball with his friends a little bit, the times he was talking with Kevin, and then when he was going swimming in the water with Juan. So the majority of what he was experiencing was fairly joyless, and so he didn't really get a chance to, you know, do something worthwhile, to have, you know, the fun and the understanding and the love and the surprise and adventure that children should have. And so because he doesn't have that, then it kind of sets him up to eventually become who he became. And the situation with his mom, despite the fact that that was, you know, his mother by blood, he really you know, took a liking and was taken in by Teresa and Juan, and that's kind of where he was able to kind of feel like a kid. He was able to have a meal, he was able to sleep at night, he was able to feel kind of safe, protected, knowing that somebody, you know, was thinking about him. And when it came down to his blood mother, feeling jealous and feeling anger that he was getting the love that he quite frankly deserves, but because there were things that were happening to him, like he was getting money and resources, and she wasn't getting them, and she felt like she was owed that because, you know, that was his parent. So it just kind of like, it's a tough circumstance that I can't fully relate to, but I just know it has to be just really, really heartbreaking for a child of that age to have to experience and then be expected to be a functioning teenager and then an adult. So it's like a lot of work ahead to just kind of hopefully unlearn as you become older.
Yeah. As I kind of continue watching this film, I think one of the things that kind of stood out to me and was actually a little surprising was kind of like the whole absence of religion. You know, in a lot of, well, in Black culture, religion is still pretty important. And I kind of found it surprising that it never came up in the film at all. Were you guys just as surprised by that? Or does that seem like now that's becoming more of a norm and religion has less importance in the development of a person's sexuality as maybe just, well, let's say spiritual environment versus your social environment, or community environment? You guys have any thoughts on that? No?
I mean, I have thoughts, but I wanted Ricardo to go first.
Ricardo, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, Taurus, go ahead. Take the baton.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna come off as a little bit biased because I'm not religious and thankfully have not been kind of entrenched in that whole experience. But what I can
You
tell
are
you as
lucky.
somebody, but as somebody who has experienced the conundrum of the relationship of religion and sexuality through other people peripherally, because I have a lot of experience with that, if you can read between the lines, is that honestly, as I watched the film, I didn't even notice because it's not a factor in my life, but it also kind of, I get how people obviously, use religion as a sense of structure and a sense of a base for morality, and how it kind of seemed like nobody there, but I guess I would say with the exception of Teresa and then some other, kind folks, nobody really had any morality. People was just living. And I guess, and there's nothing wrong with that, I suppose.
Right.
But I think there still would be some sort of like central unifying force that kind of brings communities together and makes them prosper. For most places, that tends to be a church, for better and for worse. But I don't know. I've never
So
been
you
to
weren't surprised by it. So you weren't
I guess
surprised
not.
because it's not what you expected. Okay.
I didn't even honestly
That's
I
fair.
didn't think about it until you just said it. I was like, there really wasn't a church thing in there, huh?
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. Like they didn't visit a church. I mean, I think I saw a cross on the wall in their apartment, but
For like about 5 seconds.
yes. But yeah, for me as a Black gay man, like my relationship with the church, it's like it has a long history, not a long history, but because I haven't been to a church in such a long time, because growing up in the South, it's, gay men seen and not seen. And so for me, like, because Barry Jenkins didn't, I guess put in a church scene or, a prayer scene, it didn't really faze me because for one, from my experience, I was like, and now I'm thinking about it because you brought it up, probably I would have to say that I wasn't even looking
I'm sorry,
for
what did you say?
I said I wasn't looking for Chiron to go to church or anything of that sort, because what could the church, I guess, give him and Paula at that point in their lives? Because there was no, there was no like no joy or no like in your word structure to like fall back on religion to help them out of their situation or let them see the light. Like and the light being like, come out of addiction. But the end was where I think Paula really received some, quote unquote structure with her rehab visit or time there, because that's the moment where she found who she wanted, who she needed to be, so she could feel herself, so she could pour into Chiron. Although he was an adult at this point, right? We both see them cry at the end. Like, we don't see them cry throughout the film, right? Except Chiron saying to Kevin, "Oh yeah, I cry all the time. I can even, I'm paraphrasing, turn into a ball of water, a droplet or something." But it wasn't until the end that we see them cry, that we see them be fully vulnerable with each other. So to come back to the church, I didn't really expect there to be a church scene because of, like, looking back, in retrospect, I don't know where the film would take a turn for the good in that. That's just my experience. That's just my experience with the church.
Yeah, so we only have a couple more minutes left, but one of the things I want to kind of look at is like the end of the movie. I think that in terms of the movie itself, there was a lot of ugliness in what happened to Chiron in the beginning, you know. I mean, it seems like the best things that they highlighted out of it was his relationship with Juan, his relationship with Teresa, his friendship with Kevin, and then the ending, you know, whereas like he was finally starting to seemingly come to terms with who he was. And, you know, it's like that end, I kind of felt so much emotion for him. It was like almost like there was a release for him. And that was one of the most beautiful moments in the whole film for me. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm greedy because I saw the end and just like, dang it, I wanted to see what happened. But I think that it could be left up to interpretation about what happened or what didn't happen. I think that, and it was emotional for me because I'm like, sometimes people get that realization sooner than later. Some people get it later than sooner, and some people just don't get it at all. So the fact that they were able to kind of congregate and really have that moment when so many people just, they don't get to have that. And so I'm really glad that they were able to, you know, really understand that and really kind of have that intimate moment with one another as adults who've been through some stuff and now can kind of come together and fall back a little bit on that familiarity of, okay, this was something that may have happened when we were younger, but now that maybe we have a little bit of a better understanding, maybe this is something that we could explore if there was any exploration to happen. But it was a very poignant moment, and I loved it a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, like towards the end, like it was a beautiful moment for me to see these two Black men come together and like rekindle a relationship, you know.
I'm sorry, Ricardo, I can barely hear you.
Oh, do you hear me now?
It's a little bit better.
Okay. I said it was a beautiful moment for me as well to see these two Black men rekindle their relationship and to reflect on what their childhood was, and like, you know, reflect on that and then just move forward in a beautiful and like a peaceful way.
Okay. So the last thing we're going to ask each of you guys to do is to have a Juan moment. And your Juan moment would be to share something or to say something supportive to a young Black male who's trying to figure out who he is in terms of his sexuality. What would you say? What would you say to him?
What I would say is, it's okay if it doesn't come to you right now, but I hope that you are allowing yourself to have the space, the grace, and the time to really come into yourself and understand that this is not the end all be all. Because once you break free of those shackles, once you really shed those expectations and fully come into yourself, you won't know nothing different, and you will love yourself forever for having done it.
That's awesome.
I would say that's an amazing advice. I would say that surround yourself by people who genuinely support you, and are there for you. And those people may turn into your chosen family. And if you are in a situation where your bio family is, you know, very supportive, that's amazing. Lean on them. But there are also people out in this world who are very supportive as well, and open and have open arms to be a part of your village throughout this journey, throughout your life. And they're called your chosen family. So, you know, you may not see them right away, but they're out there. And whenever you have that network in that village, they'll be there to support you without judgment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so very much for your time. I appreciate your thoughts, your comments, and definitely your participation in this film discussion. I mean, to me, again, this is a very important film, you know, just because it really illustrates and highlights, you know, one, where we should be as a society, accepting people for who they are, but two, the desperate need we have to show the support and love to young gay Black males, young ladies. We need to be there for each other. And I think we all could do a little bit better of a job and being that support, you know, or showing support or helping people find that support. So again, thank you guys so much for your thoughts, your comments, and that's all I've got to offer, or all I got to say. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Just hearing your guys' stories, remarkable. Just like, so I'm bisexual, and I actually came out not even 2 years ago. I grew up evangelical Christian, so there was a lot of discovering later on, but just, it's super important to lift each other up, super important. And I appreciate you guys for coming on here and sharing, being vulnerable, because it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I want to thank you guys for being a part of that and sharing. And I'll let everyone know. So everyone listening, you guys can actually, thank you. I just want to first thank everyone for your support for Our Voices and Our Representation in Cinema podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at www.ourvoicesproject.com for more information about what we do. Sign up for our new newsletters. You'll get notifications from our newsletters about the podcast episodes and new projects. So check out our newsletter, sign up. You can find it at Our Voices Project website. We're going to be talking about actually Sugar in August 18th. We're having a screening and we're going to be hosting it at the Little Theater. So please join us. We also will be recording it too. So if you miss that, you'll be able to hear it. So thank you guys so much. This is Deborah, cinematographer, editor for Our Voices. And thank you so much again for watching and listening.